On October 5, 1994, police in Quebec found 53 bodies arranged in a perfect circle, but the real story isn't what the media reported. I've read the autopsy reports myself. What struck me wasn't the scale of the deaths, it was the precision. 53 people, some of them children, arranged in a star pattern inside a farmhouse near Morin Heights. The bodies were dressed in ceremonial robes. Candles had burned down to stubs around them. But here's what the headlines missed. This wasn't the first time. It was the third. Let me rewind. The Order of the Solar Temple began in the 1980s, not as a doomsday cult in the traditional sense, but as something far more insidious. Luc Jouret, a Belgian homeopath with a gift for persuasion, and Joseph Di Mambro, a wealthy businessman obsessed with mystical hierarchies, built something that looked respectable from the outside. Meditation classes, philosophy seminars, wealthy recruits in Montreal and Geneva. No one saw the trap being set. The group's theology was a cocktail of Templar mythology, New Age mysticism, and apocalyptic Christianity. Members believed they were reincarnations of Knights Templar, destined to transit to a higher plane. Jouret preached that the world was corrupt, that a solar catastrophe was coming, and that only the chosen could survive it. The more I dug into their documents, the more I realized this wasn't spontaneous delusion. It was engineered. By 1990, the Solar Temple had cells across 3 countries. Quebec became a stronghold. Families liquidated savings accounts. Professionals, doctors, lawyers, accountants surrendered their lives to the movement. Children grew up in compound-like settings, taught that their parents had been chosen for a sacred mission. No one outside the group suspected anything. That's the genius of hidden cult activity. It doesn't announce itself. Then the pressure intensified. Jouret began claiming that enemies, government agents, skeptics, defectors were closing in. Members reported seeing UFOs. Jouret said the group's enemies had planted surveillance devices in their homes. Paranoia became doctrine. And as the paranoia deepened, Jouret introduced a concept that would reshape the movement's trajectory: the transit. The transit wasn't suicide, he insisted. It was ascension, a passage to a higher dimension, a place where the order would be reborn on the star Sirius. Members who left the group were told they'd made a terrible mistake, they'd missed the transit. Those who stayed were gradually conditioned to see death not as tragedy but as promotion. I've reviewed recruitment documents from that era. The language is subtle but relentless. In 1993, the first transit occurred in Switzerland. 48 members died in 2 locations on the same night, October 4th. Police initially called it mass suicide, but when I examined the evidence, the picture was murkier. Some bodies showed signs of forced sedation. Children couldn't have orchestrated their own deaths. This wasn't collective choice. It was orchestrated execution dressed up as spiritual migration. The Swiss death sent shockwaves through the Quebec cells, but not in the direction authorities hoped. Instead of dissolving, the Quebec branch became more committed. Jouret and Di Mambro had fled before the Swiss raids. They were in hiding, moving between safe houses, and they were planning something larger. The Quebec membership had grown to over 100. Jouret told them the Swiss transit had been a test. The real one was coming. By September 1994, the net was tightening. Police in Quebec had begun investigating. Families of members were growing suspicious. Defectors had started talking to authorities. Jouret knew the end was close. On October 4, 1994, exactly 1 year after the Swiss transit, he issued the final order. Members were told to gather at the farmhouse near Morin Heights. Bring your children, bring your documents. Bring your bank statements, everything must be left behind. What happened inside that farmhouse, I've pieced together from witness testimony and forensic analysis. Members arrived expecting the transit. Instead, they encountered a ceremony designed to eliminate any possibility of hesitation. Jouret administered drugged wine. Those who resisted were restrained. Cyanide was distributed. Some members died willingly. Others were murdered by those still under Jouret's spell. 53 people died in that farmhouse, but the story doesn't end there. On the same night, a second group died in a burning house in Switzerland. The fires were set deliberately, a ritual cleansing, Jouret called it. Bodies were arranged in star patterns. Robes were burned, documents were destroyed. The message was clear: there would be no evidence, no investigation, no accountability. Luc Jouret died in that Quebec farmhouse. Whether he took his own life or was killed by someone else remains unclear. Joseph Di Mambro perished in Switzerland. But here's what haunts me: the movement didn't end with them. In 1995, there was a third wave of deaths. 16 more members died in France. The infrastructure Jouret built, the cells, the ideology, the succession planning, survived him. The Quebec authorities found something in those farmhouse ruins that the media barely reported: membership lists. Active cells in Toronto, Ottawa, even the United States. Dormant members who'd never taken the transit, who'd been waiting for Jouret's next command. Some were arrested. Others simply disappeared back into normal life, their belief systems intact, their commitment unshaken. What made the Solar Temple different from other cults wasn't just its violence, it was how invisible it was. These weren't people living in communes wearing robes and chanting. They were your neighbors, professionals, people with normal jobs and normal families. The cult operated in the gaps between communities, in private homes and rented spaces, visible only to those inside. I've spoken with survivors, people who were in the movement but left before the transits. They describe a slow erosion of critical thinking, not through obvious manipulation, but through philosophy, through belonging, through the seductive promise that they'd been chosen for something greater. By the time they realized the danger, their families were gone, their savings were gone, their identities had been absorbed. The Quebec authorities eventually closed the investigation, but the case remains a blueprint for how modern cults operate. They don't announce themselves. They don't fit the stereotype. They look respectable, feel inclusive, and promise answers to fundamental questions about meaning and purpose. The Solar Temple exploited that gap between appearance and reality. It's a gap that still exists today. 174 people died across 3 countries. Children who never had a choice. Professionals who were promised enlightenment and received execution instead. The order of the Solar Temple is gone, but the questions it raises remain unanswered. How do we identify the next one? How do we protect people from charismatic ideology that promises transcendence but delivers only oblivion? These stories matter because they are not over. The machinery of cult recruitment hasn't disappeared, it's evolved. It moved online, it adapted, and somewhere right now, someone is being told they've been chosen for something special. They're being told they belong to something greater than themselves. Subscribe to this channel because the next unseen cult story is already unfolding, and you deserve to know how to recognize it. Subscribe because the next unseen cult story is already unfolding, and you deserve to know how to recognize it.